The sun was a molten disk, bleeding over the Jordanian steppes, but the heat had nothing on the furnace raging in the young pharaoh's heart. Ramesses II of that name stood alone at the edge of the desert, his magnificent chariot guards arrayed behind him, their bronze shimmering with a desperate, ill-omened glare. The scent of dust and fear hung thick, a cocktail more intoxicating and volatile than any wine of the Nile. He was barely 30, yet the weight of 2 millennia of Egyptian glory rested on his shoulders, threatened now by the looming, silent mass of the Hittite army. Ramesses had marched his battalions Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Sutek northward, intending to crush the insubordination of the rebel cities and re-establish the undisputed hegemony of the Double Crown over the Levant. He sought not just victory, but dominion. His scouts had failed him, or rather, they had been turned. 2 terrified Shasu Bedouins, captured and interrogated, had sworn that the Hittite great king Muwatalli II was far to the north, near Aleppo, paralyzed by fear and indecision. It was a lie, a poison pill swallowed whole by the eager young god king. Now, separated from his main force, the division of Amun, his own personal vanguard, had halted near the walls of Kadesh, a strategic jewel on the Orontes River, believing themselves masters of the terrain. The other 3 divisions were spread out, miles behind, marching sluggishly toward a rendezvous that would never happen. Then, the desert, which had been silent, screamed. It was not the sound of horns or drums that signaled the disaster, but a terrible collective gasp, the dying breath of the pharaoh's unprepared rear flank. Over the ridge, like a bronze tidal wave unleashed by a malevolent god, streamed 2,000 Hittite chariots, the heaviest and most formidable fighting force the Bronze Age had ever conceived. They struck the division of Ra, which was still in marching column, mid-ford across a stream, turning disciplined soldiers into scattered, drowning corpses and shattered wood. The panicked survivors, a screaming, routed flood, burst into Ramesses' camp. Chaos, the eternal enemy of the pharaoh, had arrived. Ramesses, seated under a temporary awning, preparing for a leisurely lunch, looked up to see his commanders frozen, their eyes wide with the realization of utter catastrophe. They were encircled, outnumbered, and the Hittite advance was already shattering the flimsy defensive line of the Amun division. Muwatalli, with the cunning of a desert fox, had placed his 2,000 chariots not against the main Egyptian body, but against the exposed flank and the heart of the Egyptian leadership. Ramesses II had been ambushed, betrayed by false intelligence, and was now staring down the abyss of a defeat that would end his dynasty and shatter the new kingdom forever. He knew, in that single, eternal moment of crystalline clarity, that his life was not merely a matter of survival, but a test of his divinity. If he fell now, he was a pretender. If he stood, he was truly the son of Ra. Shouting curses that would shake the very foundations of the Nile, Ramesses tore off his royal robes, snatched his bronze armor, and mounted his own chariot, pulled by his 2 magnificent horses. Victory in Thebes, and Mut is content. He was alone, his personal guards scattered or slain, a living symbol against a tide of overwhelming iron. The Hittite chariots, eager for the plunder of the pharaoh's camp, were already looting tents, their discipline dissolving in greed. This lapse, this instant of mortal weakness in the Hittite line, was all Ramesses needed. He plunged his chariot into the fray, a lone, roaring whirlwind of fire and bronze. The Hittites, seeing the royal uraeus blazing on his brow, hesitated for the briefest moment, a pause born of ancient awe for the sacred king of Kemet. Ramesses fired arrow after arrow, each one guided by the hand of Amun, splitting helmets and snapping spear shafts. He drove his chariot in daring, impossible maneuvers. The Hittite chariots designed for straight-line shock, unable to match his speed and agility. He invoked Amun not just as a prayer, but as a challenge, demanding the god lend his strength to his divine son. The king was fighting not as a general, but as an avatar of war, his courage burning a path through the enemy. His actions, visible to the scattered remnants of the Amun division, ignited a spark of suicidal hope. A handful of his household troops and personal bodyguards, ashamed of their panic, reformed and rushed to his side. The unexpected rally, led by the pharaoh himself, momentarily stalled the Hittite rout. The battle raged for hours, a confused, brutal melee of hacking axes and splintering wood. Ramesses, covered in the blood of his enemies, never dismounted, never retreated. Then, just as the last of his strength seemed to fail and the Hittites began to press him into the river, a miracle occurred, or perhaps a brilliant piece of logistical planning finally paid off. The Ne'eran, a body of Egyptian auxiliary troops arriving late from the coast, burst onto the battlefield, hitting the Hittite flank that was already exhausted and distracted by the Pharaoh's stubborn stand. Mu'atali, watching from the far side of the Orontes, saw his victory dissolving into a bloody draw. The element of surprise was gone. The Hittite chariots, heavy and cumbersome, were now trapped between the Orontes and the renewed ferocity of Ramesses' surviving men. Ramesses, seizing the moment, led a final ferocious charge, driving the enemy back into the river. The Hittites had lost 2,000 chariots and had failed to capture or kill the pharaoh. The great Battle of Kadesh. Though a tactical draw, no city was taken and no army utterly destroyed, was for Ramesses the greatest propaganda victory in Egyptian history. He had stood alone against the world, and he had survived, proving the power of his person and the divine mandate of his reign. He would return to Egypt not with conquered territory, but with a saga, a true, undeniable epic of a solitary king saved by his own hand and the grace of Amun. The next decade was devoted to immortalizing the Kadesh narrative. Ramesses knew that memory was the true currency of eternity. He dictated the Poem of Pentar, a heroic epic recounting his exploits, and had it carved not just on papyrus, but on the very walls of his temples Luxor, Karnak, and most spectacularly, on the facade of his mortuary temple, the Ramesseum. The granite surfaces of Egypt became his canvas, recounting the terror, the betrayal, the solitary charge, and the divine salvation, ensuring that every Egyptian, from priest to peasant, understood that their pharaoh was a living god, a warrior beyond mortal comprehension. This relentless self-promotion, backed by his undeniable courage at Kadesh, laid the foundation for a reign that would redefine the word pharaoh. The conflict with the Hittites dragged on, a costly, frustrating border war that eventually exhausted both empires. Ramesses, ever the pragmatist beneath the divine veneer, realized that true security lay not in endless war, but in lasting peace. 21 years after Kadesh, he signed the world's first major peace treaty, a silver tablet now lost to time, but recorded on the walls of Karnak with the new Hittite king, Hattusili III. It was a treaty of equality, friendship, and mutual defense, recognizing a balance of power rather than absolute dominance. This peace cemented his borders and freed the enormous resources of Egypt for the projects that would define his eternal legacy. The new capital city, Pi-Ramses Anak II, the domain of Ramses, great of victories, rose like a mirage from the eastern delta, a dazzling testament to his wealth and ambition. It was a bustling metropolis of over 300,000 people with massive palaces, barracks for his armies, stables for 40,000 horses, and grand temples dedicated to the triad of gods. It was a hub of international trade, diplomacy, and military power, eclipsing the ancient grandeur of Thebes. But even a new capital was not enough. Ramesses' greatest, most audacious acts of devotion were reserved for Nubia, the land of gold, which he sought to permanently integrate into the Egyptian psyche. 200 miles south of the First Cataract, carved directly from the sandstone cliffs overlooking the Nile, the great temple of Abu Simbel emerged an architectural thunderclap meant to be seen and feared by every southern tributary. The facade was dominated by 4 colossal seated statues of Ramesses himself, each over 60 feet high, gazing eastward toward the rising sun. They were not merely statues, they were mountains transformed into the image of a god, ensuring that the sun rose and set only by his command. Inside, the deep sanctuary was aligned, so that twice a year, on his assumed birthday and the anniversary of his ascension, the sun's rays penetrated the entire length of the temple to illuminate the statues of Amun-Ra, Ra-Horakhti, Ptah, and, crucially, Ramesses II himself, seated among the gods as their equal. This temple was a declaration of divine identity, a literal bridge between man and eternity. Side by side with his own monument stood the smaller, equally exquisite temple of Hathor and Nefertari. Ramesses' love for his great royal wife, Nefertari, the one for whom the sun shines, was legendary and genuine, a deep and enduring partnership that spanned decades. While he had numerous wives and over 100 children, Nefertari held a unique place, frequently depicted beside him in scenes usually reserved for deities. The inscription over the entrance to her temple was the most eloquent tribute a king could offer, a temple of excavation. Built by the king of Upper and Lower Egypt, User-Matre Setependre, son of Ra, Ramesses Mediamun, for his beloved wife Nefertari, for whom the sun shines. Her tomb in the Valley of the Queens is perhaps the most beautiful ever discovered, a riot of vibrant frescoes depicting her journey through the afterlife, a final, expensive act of love that guaranteed her eternity. Even after her untimely death, Ramesses honored her memory, though he would eventually elevate his daughter, Meritamen, and his daughter-wife, Bintanath, to the role of great royal wife. His personal life was an extension of his divinity, a fertile, sprawling, eternal family, ensuring that the bloodline of Ra would never be diluted. Ramesses reigned for an unparalleled 66 years, a length of time that few pharaohs ever approached, causing his subjects to believe he was truly blessed, or perhaps even immortal. He outlived an entire generation of courtiers, priests, and military commanders. His longevity was so pronounced that, by the time of his later years, Egypt did not know a world without Ramesses. He was a constant, a fixed point in the cosmos. In the 30th year of his reign, he celebrated the first of his 14 Sed festivals, a ritual of royal renewal meant to symbolically rejuvenate the aging king and reaffirm his spiritual and physical fitness to rule. Each subsequent Sed festival, held roughly every 3 years thereafter, was a public reaffirmation of his divinity, culminating in a celebration of unparalleled splendor that demonstrated his continued vitality well into his 80s and 90s. Ramesses became the gold standard, the template for all future kings, who would often name themselves in his honor. The sheer volume of his constructions was staggering. If he did not build a temple, he usurped an older one, stamping his cartouche, the ring, enclosing his names, like a loop of eternity over the inscriptions of his predecessors. He did this not out of malice, but from a profound, egocentric belief that he was the rightful culmination of all Egyptian history. Why credit a dead king when the living God was present? As the sun of his life finally began to set, the king had transformed Egypt. His peace treaty brought stability, his building program fueled the economy and employed thousands, and his propaganda ensured absolute loyalty. He had sired the next generation of leadership, though his designated heir, Prince Khemwaset, known as the first true Egyptologist for his work restoring ancient monuments, predeceased him. Ramesses the Great finally passed into the realm of the stars in his 92nd year, having suffered from arthritis and curvature of the spine, a common fate for men of great age. His body was prepared for eternity, mummified with the utmost skill, and laid to rest in the Valley of the Kings. Yet his death was merely a transition, not an end. The sheer scale of his monuments ensured his physical presence remained indelibly etched on the land. 2 centuries after his passing, his priests opened his tomb and moved his mummy multiple times, seeking to protect it from the rampant tomb robbing that plagued the later dynasties, an ignominious journey for the greatest king. But his soul, his Ka, remained anchored to the titanic works he left behind. The temples, the statues, the inscriptions, the endless repetition of his name, User-Matre Setependre, the Mat of Ra is powerful, chosen of Ra, had worked the ultimate magic. Ramesses II had transcended mortality. He was no longer merely a king, he was a monument, a legend, and the archetype of Egyptian power, destined to be remembered not just as a man, but as the enduring, eternal pharaoh. The legacy of Ramesses the Great was not merely a reign, but the very definition of Egyptian majesty, a golden age against which all others would forever be measured, a story carved in stone and written in the eternal language of the Nile.